And you hear the fans applauding. They are championing the champion, Magnus Carlsen, the reigning SCC title holder, also the world #1, the player from Norway. He has too many accolades to name, but he did find his footing. It was shaky at some points, but he was able to win game 2, even up this match, and Denis Lazavik now has his work cut out from the black side of a Spanish opening. So we saw something like this in the first game, a bit of a slower approach. Now we see a different one where there's a pawn on c5. So what black is trying to do is use all of this firepower to aim towards the white center, right? All these pieces, I can't draw the arrows in time because the moves are trickling in so quickly. But now when you have pawns 2 squares apart like that, think about the square in between. Knight comes to e3. You would love to bring a knight into d5. Black doesn't have the same access because white has a pawn on c3. So there is a potential hole in the black center, but you also have gained a lot of space. And I've said this before, when you decide with less space you want to trade pieces, playing a4 and taking on b5, that allows white to develop his rook from the starting square. We often think of development as moving rooks towards the center and then trying to use an open middle of the board, but actually this rook is on its best square. The a file, the only open file on the board, is white's. And so with that command of the a file, now he strikes in the center, does Magnus Carlsen. Instead of capturing, the bishop slides back to f8. I think it's a good choice. If this pawn gets on d5, not only does it attack a knight on c6, it actually clears the path for this bishop on c2. And in the first game of this match, I was talking about how that bishop, it would love an open diagonal. You would like to get an attack going. It's not so easy when you're playing someone like Denis Lazavik. The fans are waving. We see people having a good time here in London. It's nice to see everybody showing up for this event, for the players. I assume there are many Magnus fans out there, hopefully many Denis fans as well, as the youngster continues to shine on the biggest stages. And here we see, at the moment, he has no problems from the black side. I would actually say, out of the openings, throughout the first, I don't know exactly what percentage, but let's call it the first 60, 70% of the games, Denis has been playing just maybe even better than Magnus. And you can see sort of a smirk on Magnus's face. He's trying to figure out, like, what's my actual plan here? I'm playing a guy who rarely breaks. He also rarely bends. So, like, what am I supposed to do when he plays as solidly as he does? And I think for Denis, this is a moment to actually say, well, if Magnus is going to keep rerouting his pieces, taking his time, trying to use that d5 square, you often want to fill that square yourself. Instead, Denis does, I think, an equally good idea. Rook to a8, trying to trade off the rooks, using the open file for himself. I did like the move pawn to d5. I guess there is some inherent risk there that this pawn is protecting these pawns, and so by pushing it, you actually are leaving your pawns a little bit vulnerable. So right now we see that Magnus brings his bishop out. He's connecting his queen to his rook, so he's not blundering anything along that line. And both players, they're settling into this third game. Plenty of time on the clock. We see nearly 4 minutes for both. It's the type of game where it's not about this individual moment, like unless you, blunder the house. But in reality, what's happening is finding the key squares, finding the way to parry off threats. Queen to b7 says, are you sure you want to bring that knight to d5? Because if you do that, my queen is actually staring through that black knight towards that central square. So Magnus says, I do want that square. Please let me have it. And this is a critical moment because Denis Lazavik has an ambitious move, a forward move here, but it's a committal move as well. And if he pushes his c-pawn to c4, it is explosive. He is opening up many files. He's actually temporarily sacrificing a pawn. But I think that allows his queen to see the light of day along the b file. It causes some serious issues in the white camp, and I do think Denis spots it. The way he's looking at this board, he looks like someone ready to pounce. And for Magnus Carlsen, he's used to being the one who's always the aggressor, always the one with the upper hand. But Denis Lazavik says, you know, I don't need to take that ambitious, that maybe overly committal line. I'm instead just going to reroute my own pieces. What Magnus does, I can do just as well in this game. And black has full equality. There's no issue at the moment for Denis. But how many times have we said this throughout Magnus Carlsen's career? It's even until it's not. And so at the moment, I'm trying to come up with a plan for Magnus. Maybe there's an opportunity, not now, but in the near future, to play for the move f4. It looks risky. He starts with h4, alpha zero style, trying to gain space. Perhaps put this pawn on h5, because if the pawn gets there, the black knight does not have forward squares to jump to. And that's a critical idea for many people. A key thing to take note of is that, like, it's not just about directly threatening checkmate, trying to win your opponent's queen. You actually want to clamp down on essential squares and make your opponent's life as difficult as possible. So at this moment, we see the move rook to d8. I think it's pretty clear what Denis is drumming up. d5, let's open that D file, get the rook behind a pawn that's moving. And I think for Magnus, the key is, do I play this move C4 right now? He doesn't. He plays H5. And if you're Denis, you went rook D8 for a reason. And it's okay to actually change your mind, especially in a position of this nature where nothing is all that concrete. But he wanted to play D5. He should play D5. But he's definitely looking at this E5 pawn and saying, can I get away with it? Am I going to be okay? Or am I actually walking into some danger? D5 is played. Go, Denis. He knows what he needs to do. And Magnus is responding with knight to G4, just like we were talking about. So this moment here, you're going to walk into a pin. F6 protects E5. You always want to create a pawn chain. A pawn's best friend is another pawn. And here, F6 keeps that pawn safe. You are allowing a pin, but white doesn't have a way to pile pressure on the pin piece. Knight E3, you're going back where you came from. Black already has enough protectors here. On that knight, the king will slide away. That's that. And black actually can threaten C4 to break that pin. And then the knight can try to move out the way. So be careful if you're Magnus. I mean, C4 for black is an idea. Maybe C4 for white can be played just to try to trade some pieces, make this bishop look a little bit better. Perhaps that bishop could slide all the way out to A5 because it's really not doing all that much at the moment. So a good play from both sides here. C4 played by Magnus. You see the clock is about equal, slight advantage on time for Carlsen at the moment. And after C4, Lazavik sitting here thinking, okay, do I take that pawn? He does. Queen takes C4. So Magnus voluntarily damages his own structure. He has two isolated pawns that he's going to have to deal with, but they're pins in multiple directions. I mentioned the knight is pinned, but so is the C5 pawn. So that means pawn to B4 is actually a ridiculous looking move because it looks like black has three pieces covering the square: pawn, knight, bishop, but none of them can take it because the C pawn is pinned to the black queen. The knight cannot legally move because the king is behind it. So queen E6 played. Now if you play B4, the pawn can capture. You're no longer pinned. So great move there, queen to E6 by Denis Lazavik. He can move his knight, and he probably will do that, knowing the type of player that he is. Retreating the knight to trade queens. It seems like that's the type of move that he would like to play. You have to be a little bit worried about his time at the moment because Denis down to a minute and a half. We see that Magnus at 2 minutes and 18 seconds. That's quite a healthy lead on the clock, especially if the queens stay on the board. There could be some knight sacrifices in front of the black king that you just have to keep an eye on. So Denis, he's really deep in the think tank right now. He goes knight c7. He could have played that move in 2 seconds. Instead, he played it in 29. Rook d4 is the follow-up. Great move there by Denis. It doesn't get an exclamation point, but the knight on c7 was under attack and pinned. He goes rook d4 to force the queen trade. The knight had to move back because it was under attack. He takes the d3 pawn. So not the first time we have seen Denis Lazavik steal a pawn from Magnus Carlsen. So Denis is playing great chess, but you could see on the big screen there, he is down a minute. His time is ticking. And you see Denis before, he was calm. He was able to win up that pawn. Then in game 2, he was up a pawn, but it didn't go his way. So he needs to have a memory of a goldfish, as Ted Lasso would say. Forget about that second game and just play the position right now. He is up a healthy pawn. Like, there is no reason why he should be worried about pretty much anything in this position. And if I were Denis, I would even consider moving my knight into e2, just posing some potential threats. I mean, is that a threat, capturing the bishop on c3? I don't think that Magnus is all that afraid of it, but there's an f4 square to jump into. So Denis really needs to keep himself safe on the clock, but on the board he is playing excellent, excellent chess. He offers a trade of rooks. Magnus says no. The king slides into e6. Now it's got a little bit of a home there. If you're Magnus, you're tempted to take this knight on d4 and play knight to f5. And I think Denis overlooked this. He has to take with the rook. He wants to take with the pawn. He wants to connect his pawns, get a passer. But if he takes with the pawn, he actually loses the game on the spot. So just to be clear, the knight on e3 is jumping into a light square. I've talked about why. Knights can be so dangerous against bishops. Rook takes d4. It actually stops knight f5 at least for one turn because the g4 pawn is hanging. So rook takes d4, knight f5 is a blunder because of rook takes g4. He takes with the pawn. He allows knight f5, knight takes g7 check. This is really bad news for Denis because at the end of this, what's going to happen is the knight's going to take. It's going to go back to f5. I'm just going to let this all play out. He's going to trade rooks. The h6 pawn drops. And now it's actually a reverse of game 1. Magnus is giving Denis a taste of his own medicine, and it was the clock that was his greatest asset, was Magnus Carlsen, because Denis, he ran low, he ends up taking with a pawn. Oh, he takes on h6 now, and that's that. That is really that, because the king is going to stop the black passers, and then the knight will take, retreat back, the h-pawn goes, and black will have to give up the bishop, much like what happened in game 1, roles reverse. So the white king there it goes. It's stopping the c-pawn. Here, I think you can even just bring your knight back to f5, as Magnus does, because the h-pawn is so powerful. The white pawn can then slide to f3. The king can go to d3. This is it. I mean, you can just put all your pawns and pieces on light squares, and that should be the game. And he first goes h6 because he can't stop the pawn. That's game over. Magnus Carlsen does win game 3.